Today in the church calendar year marks the end of our church year. The final Sunday of the church year is this Sunday, called the last Sunday of Pentecost, and it prepares us for next Sunday, which is the first Sunday of Advent, which is the beginning of the new church year. Today is also what's known by some to be Christ the King Sunday, and for that we get this reading from the Gospel of John between Pilate and Jesus. It's a bit of a curious reading, but it's curious to me this morning because of how the lectionary writers, the people who pick which passages we put in and when we put them in, where they stop the reading. They stop at verse 37, which is Jesus talking or answering Pilate's question about being a king. Jesus says, "You say that I am a king, and for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." But what's curious to me is actually the next verse, verse 38, which the lectionary writers have left off. The verse 38 says, Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" Now, this question that Pilate asks, I think, is of utmost importance in trying to understand the interaction between Jesus and Pilate. Now, Jesus never answers Pilate to this question. It's more of a rhetorical question, but we need to understand why Pilate is asking it. We need to understand kind of Pilate's perspective. And to do so, we have to remember who Pilate is. Pilate is the local governor. He's the local kind of authority in the area that covers Jerusalem. And as such, he is responsible for this particular area that have the Jewish people in it. Now, the Jewish people have their own rules and regulations. They have their own authorities, the chief priests and the scribes. And for the most part, they're able to adjudicate matters of religious law themselves. But when certain infractions happen, or when there are disputes among them, they have to go to the civil authority, to Pilate, who's in charge of the region. But Pilate is not the emperor. He's not the kind of top dog in the empire, in the system. He has bosses above him all the way up to the emperor himself. And so Pilate finds himself kind of as a middleman, having to keep the peace and adjudicate these different matters. And so when Jesus is dragged before him, Pilate is really having an interrogation of Jesus in order to confirm that the accusations made against Jesus are true. He's trying to confirm Jesus' status as a rebel who is claiming to be the rightful king. So when you understand that Pilate is asking these questions to try to get Jesus to say that he's a king, now it starts to make sense. When Jesus talks about his kingdom not being from this world, Pilate then says, "So you are a king. If you have a kingdom, you must be a king. You say that I am a king," Jesus says. "For this I was born, for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." Jesus answers a very kind of black and white question with a very kind of abstract, obtuse, philosophic answer. And so Pilate's turn in asking the question, "What is truth?" it's really kind of a sarcastic question. It's disingenuous, it's cynical, it's dismissive, let alone rhetorical. Pilate doesn't care about the truth. He has more important matters at hand. Pilate is the ultimate pragmatist. He's interested in running his territory well. He's interested in making his bosses and the emperor happy. He wants to know what works, what functions well, what keeps the show going on the road, what keeps everyone relatively happy so that he doesn't have an uprising on his hands. He wants to make sure that the economy is ticking along and the infrastructure is well maintained and the coffers are full. Pilate is worried about the day in and day out operational matters of his region. Now, before we go and distance ourselves from Pilate too much, one quick look around our modern world reveals that there are a lot of Pilates in our midst. A lot of the major industries are run by pilots who are worried about operation and about the bottom line. Politics and business and finance, major sports, and even medicine all often operate by terms of efficiency and productivity rather than by the terms of truth. Pilate's not that different from so many of us. life is short. We just need to make it work. We don't have time to philosophize and wax poetic. So, Jesus, bringing up truth, gets this rhetorical, sarcastic, disingenuous response from Pilate. What is truth? Well, I'd like to take a stab at answering it, even though Jesus doesn't answer it in this particular passage. He's been talking about what truth is for chapters before this. Before he gets arrested, Jesus spends chapter after chapter talking about what truth is. And so I'd like to categorize it in kind of three buckets, three categories. Truth for Jesus has to do with the past, the future, and the present. The past. For Jesus, salvation history begins with creation of humankind. We were created in God's image in order to be a companion to God. But failing to do that, God instead decides to call a particular family, Abraham, to be a family that would be very close to God and would be able to usher blessings to the rest of the world. Of course, that doesn't go so well, and this family ends up eventually in Egypt in captivity, and God frees them from their captivity and liberates them in order to be a covenant people, a people of promise, and a people governed by law. Well, when that doesn't work out so well, God finally decides to come among the people as one of the people in order to not just save the chosen family, but to extend that blessing, fulfilling the promise, to all people, to all nations. Now, the future that God promises to us, Jesus summarizes by talking about the kingdom. Now, for Jesus, the kingdom is not a geopolitical reality. It's not a piece of land or property. And the type of king that will run this kingdom is a very different type of king indeed. In this kingdom, we will be with God and with a renewed creation. It's not just that we're going back to Eden, but that God will take this fragile and kind of broken life of ours and pull us together, restore us, and make something new and beautiful out of it. The kingdom that Jesus is talking about is a kingdom of promise and of hope. But they're connected, this new kingdom and the past, the salvation history. They're connected in the present for Jesus by Jesus himself. Jesus is the truth, he says. And what thrilled people back then about Jesus, and still captivates us today, is that Jesus connects the past and the future with this new way of being with one another and with God. Once we experience this new way of being, we'll never be thirsty again. Jesus is the truth in the moment. He is that present embodiment of what truth is, and he connects the truth of the past with the truth and the promise of the future. Now, if all of this is kind of going over your head, I'm sure you have good company with Pilate and the rest. And in fact, I found myself over Thanksgiving reflecting a little bit on this as I was preparing for this sermon. As you know from previous stories, my Thanksgiving in my family is a big deal, and I had the opportunity to fly up for a brief 72 hours to Philadelphia with my family and extended family. And we gathered at my mom and dad's house, and I like to cook, and my mom cooks. My aunt cooks, Aunt Sue. And my cousin Margaret is beginning to cook, although she wants to make everything kind of innovative and new and different. And we like tradition at the Groff family household. And so early on Thursday morning, we were dealing with our two Thanksgiving birds, our two turkeys, because we had 13 people coming for dinner. And my aunt was washing one of them, and my mom was stuffing another one when my dad walked in. Now, if you've met my dad, you know that he likes to talk, and he likes to go on and on about many things, sometimes nothing. And he's a morning person, so he likes to cluck about in the morning. So he came in bright and early and started to chat. I don't really know what he was talking about. We were very focused on the turkeys. They were the prime piece of our focus. And after a few moments of Dad talking and inquiring about how everyone was doing and what they were looking forward to that day, my mom shot my dad a look that only my mother can shoot my dad. And with a few quick words, she said, "Sandy, get out of here." And off he went, like a dog with his tail between the legs, out of the kitchen, never to be seen in the kitchen again. Well, Thanksgiving came, and we had a lovely meal, a wonderful dinner. The turkeys came out beautifully, and all of the food was great. It was relatively on time. And the next day was Black Friday, and we did our thing. And then Saturday morning came about, and it was early in the morning when my flight back here to Florida was to depart. And Dad, of course, being the morning person, got to drive me to the airport, as though it's a privilege. Well, in the car, my dad couldn't help but to kind of reminisce about the Thanksgiving that we just had. It was, in a manner of speaking, very traditional, a very similar Thanksgiving with all of the fixins. And yet it was new because our family has been expanding. My brother has been married in the last year and has had a baby. There was a little, baby there. And my sister got engaged. And so there's all of this kind of hope and optimism about the future on the horizon. And my dad was so excited just to talk about how great all of this was and how wonderful and positive and how hopeful it was. And I sat there listening to him, and when he stopped talking for just a little while, I kind of threw in my 2 cents about how the meal went. Well, we were a little late getting everything out, and the sweet potato casserole wasn't quite hot enough, and the green beans were overcooked, is what I said. And he's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And he said, well, that's all well and good, but the important part is that we were all together, he said. And it clicked as I was thinking about Pilate. It clicked that I had become the pilot of our Thanksgiving. I had focused so intently on the operation of the thing that I had kind of I didn't miss it, but I missed the point a little bit. I wasn't able to enjoy in that present moment the family and the love that surrounded that meal. And I think that's exactly what we see on this Sunday with Jesus and Pilate. Jesus is standing there holding the past in his hand and holding the future in his hand and embodying that present moment. In Christianity, we call that past faith. And we call that future hope. And we call that present moment with Christ love. And that, I think, is what I needed to hear, at least, on this Thanksgiving. That's what I need to hear as I end this year and kind of look forward to the new church year, kind of like a New Year's resolution. Instead of worrying so much like Pilate, worrying about the things that are happening and the ways in which we make them happen, instead to be present and to follow Christ from the past that is rich with history into a future that is brimming with hope and promise through a love that has no end. The love that characterizes the truth of Christ, this present moment with Christ, is a difficult love. It finds us sometimes being pulled in the middle. Sometimes we feel like we have to get it done and no one else will do it. Sometimes we feel like that love is pulling us between people who disagree with us or warring factions. Sometimes that love is bridging or making peace with people we'd rather not make peace with. And yet Jesus, in this moment, loves Pilate. He loves his enemy. And he embodies that love so that we may become part of that love with him. So that holding that faith, hope, and love, past, future, and present together, Jesus' truth would set us free. May we know that truth and follow in that love so that we too may be set free as we begin a new year together. Amen.